Okay, so we've just added back in a little bit of detail to our model here, and how much detail you really want to add back into it is up to you. I recommend you go above and beyond what I'm doing for the purposes of this course, but this will give you the idea more of the general workflow. So once you have all your high-res sculpting done, we are ready to unwrap our UVs so that we can bake our normal maps. So sorry, I'm just noticing a couple areas of like pinching. Let's go down a couple. And just smooth that out. Can't spend too much time on this because, you know, the longer you look at it, there's always going to be something to fix. At some point, you just have to be done with it. So let's say we're done with it here, and let's move on to our UV unwrapping. So I'm going to avoid temptation to keep working on this by coming into object mode. And then in my multi-res here, I'm going to change my level, my viewport levels down to 0 to get our original mesh back, our basic mesh here. And I'm going to start UV unwrapping for this body here. So for the time being, I'm just going to hide the eyes. We'll come back to the eyes in a minute. But let's switch over to our UV editing mode here. And how you go about unwrapping characters is, it's a bit of an art form. It takes some patience and some practice. I'm saying I have some topology issues here, which were not there before. So let me just clean these up because that's going to bug me. I can also do a mesh cleanup operation on this. If I select everything, let's come out of UV editing mode for a second. If I select everything and I come up to this mesh, there's this cleanup window here. And this has some operations that will allow you to clean up your mesh a little bit, such as if you have any like loose floating vertices that aren't attached to any faces, you can delete loose. I had none. It will tell you what it's removed or what it's done here. But the one I actually want to do is to merge by distance. And what this will do is that any two points that are too close together in your mesh, it will merge them into a single point. So you can change the merge distance here in this bottom corner context menu, and that will merge any vertices that are very close together in space. So that seems to have fixed my issue with my line of symmetry. Let me just check it by, yeah, that looks okay. Okay, so let's go about UV unwrapping this guy. So I think everyone has sort of a different methodology for where to place our seams for characters. So there are some couple like hard and fast rules when you're UV unwrapping for objects. And the biggest one is that if you have anything that is a 90-degree angle or like tighter than that, more acute, you need to have a UV seam there, and it needs to be marked as a sharp edge. We have a organic form here, and we've really only been dealing with organic forms up until this point, so this has not really been an issue for us. But the drawback is that with organic characters, sometimes it's a little bit less clear where to place our seams. So honestly, we just have to go about tucking them away in the places that we think are going to be not as noticeable to the viewer. So I try to keep my seams on my characters symmetrical. And if you want, you can even delete half your mesh, put on a mirror modifier, and mark half of your seams and then apply it. That would break my multi-res here, so I'm not going to do that, but that is something you can do if you are working with like a high-res version and a low-res version as separate meshes. You can definitely do that. So I'm going to start with these shoulders here, and I'm even going to come into edge select mode to speed this up a little bit so that when I am in edge select mode, I get a different context menu when I right click, which will give you all sorts of functions related to edges. So in edge select mode, we have our mark seams. You can still mark your seams in vertex select mode. You just have to pull up the edge menu either from here, or I believe pressing Control E will also bring up your edge select menu regardless of your selection mode. So let's just start dividing this mesh up. I'm going to pick the top of the limbs here to separate them from the body all the way around. And I'm going to do the same thing here in the head for the neck. Okay, so let's see what this just gives us. Let's select everything by pressing A, U, unwrap. So this is obviously still a mess, but at this point, what I am going to do to help me visualize what is happening here is I'm going to add a UV grid so that I know basically when my UVs are good. So we have not added a UV grid to this file before, so let's create a new image. 1024 is fine. UV grid. And then most importantly, just change the generated type from blank to UV grid and hit OK. Now, we've gone through this before when we talked about UV unwrapping, so I'm going over this really quickly. So if you're a little bit lost as to what I'm doing and why, go back and watch the previous video on UV unwrapping for the prop. So there's a default material that just sort of comes in Blender when you open a new file. So let's just use that one that's already been created. And in the graph here, let's hit Shift A, add an image texture, and select our UV grid, connect it to base color. Okay, so this is what our UVs currently look like, and they are obviously a complete mess. So, but now that we have the grid on here, as we go, we can better see what's going on here. So where you want to add seams on the body is up to you and up to your target platform. If this was for an animation, I would probably hide all my seams towards the back of the character here, because most of the time in animation, you're looking at the front of the character. However, we know that this is for a 3D third-person platforming game, so we know that we're actually going to be spending a lot of time looking at the back of our character here. So instead of putting all the seams along the back, I'm actually going to put them on the side. So I just alt-click to select this whole seam here. So let's mark it. And that has taken me all the way to the hands. Now I probably don't want to go quite this far. So let's clear that. And clear the same points on the back of, or I'm sorry, on the other side of the mesh as well. So let's try to select our mirror. So I'm going to hit space to bring up my search. And I'm going to search for the select mirror function. So what that has done is it has gotten rid of my selection here, but it says that it has mirrored 5 edges. So when I come over to the other side, it has all those 5 edges selected. So now I can clear this seam. And I want to disconnect the hands from the arms. So I'm going to mark seams there and there where my seams end. So let's see what we have now. Let's select everything with A, U, and unwrap it. Okay, so we obviously have a lot of distortion still happening, but a slightly better result than our last time. So we're just going to continue on with this process. Let's come down the sides of the legs as well. And which seams you pick for the sides are, it depends on how you retopologized it. So I just press C on my keyboard to bring up my paint select, and we talked about how to select things with this sort of brush select here. But if you want to paint a deselection, instead of clicking and dragging over your mesh with your left mouse button, if you click down your middle mouse button and drag, it will deselect everything under your brush. So I can come in here. So I've just selected from this edge basically down to the bottom of the foot here. So let's mark that as a seam and then do the same thing on the other side. For this center line, I'm just gonna alt-click to get this interior center here. Now it has selected everything from between them, so maybe it is easier to just make a single selection here or move forward by 1. Let's move forward by 1 because that gives me a pretty clean selection. I'm just going to deselect some of these faces down here, or some of these edges down here, I should say. Let's mark that as a seam. All right, let's check our progress. All right, the legs are looking a lot better. The arms are looking a lot better. So I've come down to this edge loop with my seams. So let's select like there and try, basically what I'm going to try to do is to separate the bottom of the foot from the rest of the foot. Actually, I think this is a better seam. So let's select this one and we can just clear these ones. And clear this little overhang. So what I'm just trying to do here is basically connect these edge loops together with a seam so that I can get a clean separation in my UV islands. So right now this wouldn't do a lot for me because I haven't completed connecting these seams together. But once I do, we should get a good result. Okay, let's check our progress. Alrighty, okay, so the feet look pretty good, the legs look pretty good. Obviously this torso has a lot of issues still. And if you ever want to be able to tell which island is which, if you're having a hard time identifying your islands based on your selection alone, you can hit this button up here, which is UV sync selection. So basically what it will do is whatever you have selected over here will be highlighted over here and vice versa. So if I wanted to know, you know, where this was, I could highlight a section and say, okay, it's this island right here because that's what's highlighted. And that's, yeah, that's obviously very stretched. So we need, and like it's stretched over here, it's compressed right here. So we need to connect these, we need to divide along the side here. So let's come in here. So this seam sort of wraps really dramatically around to the front. So I'm actually going to pick a seam from back here that stays a little bit more aligned with the side. And let's do the same thing on the other side. Okay, like much better result with the torso when we have these separated out. Okay, we're still getting some stretching in the face, so we need to add some seams here to make some relief cuts, essentially. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm not going to divide the face in half completely, but I am going to add sort of a relief cut down the forehead. Maybe to here, like that. Let's check what that has done for us. Still getting some stretching, especially in the snout, the mouth area. So let's add another relief cut here. Let's see what this does. Okay, that's a much better result. We can also view our stretch by coming into our UV guides here, our overlays, and enabling display stretch. So if we look at this area behind the ear is very stretched. So, and in fact, we can see some wobbliness happening right here. So let's add some seams over here. And maybe divide them like that. Let's see if that fixes our stretch at all. In fact, it's caused more issues, so we need to come up to this edge here is what's causing our problem. Let's mark our seam. Let's get rid of these ones and let's come across this way. Okay, let's see if that has fixed it. Not really. So there's a bit of trial and error that has to happen with these, unfortunately. It's just kind of about getting the hang of it. Okay, so that stopped our overlap from happening here. We're still getting some strange stretching because we have some strange topology right here. So this face is not, I did not do a good job on my retopology here. So let me clear these seams. And what I'm gonna do is join these faces right here this way and do the same thing on the other side. I think that will conform a little bit better to the shape of our ear by splitting this face. Let's try that now. We're still getting some bad overlap of our UV seams. Sometimes when you get things like this, it usually means that you just have too many seams in that area, or you need to completely separate these islands out. So let's think about this. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. So let's replicate this on the other side. It's not totally ideal to have a small patch island like I have right here, but as I said, for organic shapes, sometimes it's a little bit less clear where the best place for seams are. This one is also not doing anything. Interesting. Okay. Okay, so we have less stretch in the ears now, and there's a little bit less overlap. Let me just try to clear these to see if this will cause any problems. And it does. Okay. So a little bit of trial and error happening here, but you can see that it does take some time to really get this down. Another way to go would be to separate the face around this mask topology. That would be a perfectly valid way to do these seams, because we're going to be texturing them a little bit differently. So they're not going to be quite, if you have like an area where two different colors or textures meet, sometimes it's fine to have a seam there because it won't be quite as noticeable because of the differing textures. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I might just separate these ears out entirely because this patch is really bothering me. So let's look at how we would go about doing that. I'm going to start by just clearing all these seams I already made around the ears. Okay. So if we were to come around maybe like that, but instead of that, exactly what we would do would be to come around this way and maybe separate them like that. Let's see how that looks. I'm still getting a lot of stretching in this ear here because I think we need to separate the back as well. So something like that. And I won't lie here, I could have spent more time getting the topology around these tiny crevices and stuff a little bit better, but I was a little bit pressed for time in order to get this model to a workable state to start recording these videos. So there's a little bit of messy topology and stuff in here, to be perfectly honest. Okay, so this stretching is all in the hands because we haven't done the hands yet, so that's perfectly okay. Let's do them now. Okay, so for the hand, I want to try to come around the sides as well, as best I can anyway. Except I don't want this middle portion. And I probably don't even want anything on the arms. I'm just debating whether or not the arm seams would be better here or where I have already placed them. I think actually this might be better. So let's clear the ones we already placed. Typically, the straighter your seams are, the less noticeable they'll be. So it's really a lot of trial and error, but you typically want to flow in a single edge because if you have them kind of jagged around certain areas, they will be more noticeable. So we just need to connect these together. So this is what I'm talking about with like the jaggedness. This would probably be a more noticeable seam. However, since it is tucked away into the crevice of the fingers here, we're probably never going to notice that. And I don't think we need this one in the front. With cylindrical objects, typically you just need one closed seam around the tops and then one along it, and then it will unwrap as a rectangle in 2D, or roughly a rectangle. Let's check our progress on these hands. Okay, better, but still more work to do. Let's come around here. So now we just have to face this issue right here of how to connect this point to this point. And the cleaner your topology is, the easier these connections should be. But like I said, I probably did not spend quite as much time on the topology as I should have. And for that, I apologize, but you know, sometimes you just have to work with what you got. Okay, so obviously we still have having some major problems because this is a single island, so there's an area where our hands are, the top of our hands and the bottom of our hands are still connected. So now we just need to look for that gap. Okay, so it looks like it's on the other hand, actually. That's just something I forgot to mirror properly across. It's probably like a single edge or something. Yep, it's this edge right here is causing all our problems. Okay, let's try this one more time. Okay, so this looks decent. Let's look at our actual islands here. These are not overlapping, they're just very close together. We're still having some issues with the feet because we have not done those yet. No worries there either. Let's separate the feet from the ankles by just selecting these loops here. All right, so we have, it looks like one of our feet is okay. This foot looks okay. It's this foot that has an issue with it. Oh, because we did not finish coming around the middle toe here, of course. So let's just do that now. And in fact, the easiest way to probably do that is just to select where we have our seams on our other foot. And mirror that selection and mark our seam. Okay. Okay. So it looks like we have all of our hands and our feet separated. This is our ear. Yes. So anything that's like a really tiny patch like this, I tend to take a second look at it because it's sort of inconvenient to have a lot of small UV islands. So one such as this, there's no reason for this to be its own island really. So we can make it not its own island anymore if we just come in and clear our seam. I think that one is the better one to clear. This is also doing nothing for us. Okay, and the same thing on the other side. Clear that. Okay, let's look at that. So now that has just attached those little patches right here to this larger island, which is better for our purposes. So I'm looking at this. I'm not seeing any major distortion in the grid here. I'm also not seeing any serious areas of concern for stretching in the islands here. Everything is pretty much that solid blue. There's a little bit of stretching here and there, but that's okay. So I am going to call this done now that we have our UVs unwrapped for this model. In the next video, when we come back, we are going to bake our normal maps. So really quick, there is one thing I forgot to mention, and that is UV unwrapping these eyes here. So the way that I would go about this, because I want this whole character to use a single material in Unreal, the way that we go about this is we can keep these objects separate, but they need to share a UV space. So what that means is that if I were to give these spheres the same material and shift and click to highlight both of these objects. If I tab now into edit mode here, you can see that the UVs for these spheres are completely encompassing this whole space and overlaying on top of our character UVs, which is not what we want. So let's come in and just UV unwrap this eye. So I'm just going to hit backslash on my keyboard to get this local view, which basically shows only the object you have selected and hides everything else temporarily. So these UVs are actually okay for this sphere. These are just the default UVs that come with a new sphere. You do notice that there is some stretching that's caused, by how these UVs are laid out. And you certainly can just add in a cut here if you want, or divide it this way. It's largely up to you how you want to do this. I think I'm gonna cut them this way. So let's mark this seam here. And because I'm still using the mirror modifier, the UVs will be mirrored over here. So that's just gonna give me these plain circles here. There's not too much stretching, at least at this scale, and we don't have to worry about it. So the next thing I want to do is to bring back my character model. So I'm just going to hit slash on the keyboard again to bring that back. And now with both of these selected, if I tab into edit mode, I can edit the points on both of these. So I'm just going to click on my eye here to select an edge. Then I'm going to press L on the keyboard to select everything that is linked to it. And all I have to do here is scale these eye pieces down so that they roughly match the scale of the grid here. So they need to be scaled down a little bit more to about there. So this is close to the size of like where these should be. The other thing we can do is, as long as everything that you are working on has a zeroed out scale, or I should say a one up scale, otherwise known as having its scale applied, we can average the scale of these islands. So let's apply the scale of both of these models. They currently have a 0.072 scale, which is not what we want. So let's select these models, hit Control A and apply just the scale to get this to be ones for both of these. So what I can do now is select them both, tab into edit mode, hit A to select everything, and under UV, there is a option here that says average island scale. So this will automatically snap everything to match so that the UVs match their scale in the world. So as long as we have our scale applied, that means that these will match their scale relatively. And you can see that they did get slightly bigger here. So the last thing we need to do to get these eyes to work properly with the rest of our character sheet and materials is we just want to make sure that there's no overlap here between the eyes and the rest of the body here. So they just need their own space on the UV sheet here. So the last thing I want to do is I want to make sure I'm using the space efficiently. So I'm just going to select everything and hit Pack Islands. Now this algorithm works great for hard surface items that have very rectangular UVs. For organic objects such as this one that have irregular shapes, it does work pretty well, but there may be some, space inefficiencies here. But it's more important that we maintain a consistent scale across all of our UV islands so that we don't have like areas here, very dense grid, and then very large grid here. We want to make sure that the texture is consistent across the entire model. So in this case, I think it's okay. The last thing to note that is if you use the Pack Islands to arrange your islands on your 0 to 1 UV space, you do get this little drop down right here. And what this allows you to do is set a margin. So we talked a little bit about margins before when we discussed UVs, but we discussed how like UVs shouldn't be too close together on this sheet because there will be some bleed over here, and we want these all to have their own space. So I'm just going to increase this margin to 0.01, which is much larger than it needs to be, but we have the space. Just keep in mind that increasing this margin space here may reduce to the size of your islands, which will make you lose resolution. So it's kind of just about finding that ideal spot between giving enough space around your UV islands and getting the maximum texture resolution possible for them. So I set mine to 0.007 for this. There's a little bit of inefficiency here, and you could spend more time trying to pack these nicely, but for the purposes of this demonstration, these UVs will work. So the most important thing is that everything is contained in the 0 to 1 space, meaning within this grid, and that nothing is overlapping. Okay, so just a quick little side note on UVs, and after this, we are actually ready to start baking our maps.